Hi folks. So today we have the Economic Times newspaper, the editorial page of this, and today is 17th January. So there are a few articles which I think will be relevant. So first is the important one, um, which is regarding the economics, and it is about how the rupee is depreciating against dollars. And the second one would be end of the world is not high. So it is mainly related to the climate change. So we'll look into both of them and see what are the views of the editors here. Okay, so the first one is how to write the rupee slide. So here, what does the editor says is that why does India catch a cold every time when the rupee sneezes? So there is a notion of national pride tied to a strong currency, but it's not an argument grounded in economics. It is unlikely that policymakers take it too seriously. That said, serious policymakers are concerned about the rupee's depreciation. They have good reasons for it, but ideally, at this point in its economic journey, India should be able to benefit from a depreciating rupee. Okay, so this is what they have been telling that why does, I mean, when the dollar is strengthening or even when the value of Indian rupee is going down, why does it is affecting everything in the economic point of view? So India should be able to benefit from a depreciating rupee. Fundamentally, when the rupee declines vis-a-vis the dollar or any other major currency, the two things happen. Exports become cheaper, right? When depreciation of any rupee or I mean of the currency takes place, then the exports become very high and the exporters get benefited. And imports become more expensive, in theory, less competitive. So that should be a good thing for a country whose two most pillars of are to increase competitiveness of manufacturing for foreign and domestic and to reduce the dependence on imports. So it is basically telling that self-reliance, which we had a motive, and to export as much as we can in the international market. So why this both the things which is in favor of us, why these are too concerning, right, in the economy point of view. So several countries have followed a deliberate policy of undervaluing their currency to gain a competitive advantage. In recent years, China has been the most notable example. Much is said about China's industrial policy, including subsidies, free land, and cheap power. But somehow less is said about the cornerstone of that policy, a weak renminbi. Renminbi. Okay, so it says about why the Chinese renminbi, the currency is weaker, right? So it says about the same situation which has been faced by China and how China had tackled all this. So it had included about its industrial policy, the inclusion of subsidies, free land, and cheap power. So in an earlier era, Japan did something similar vis-a-vis the dollar. The pushback from the US finally came in the 1990s when Japan voluntarily allowed the yen to appreciate against the dollar under the Plaza Accord. While there are several reasons for Japan's long stagnation since the 1990s, the currency correction was one factor. So to its credit, the current government is the first since liberalization to focus on creating a competitive manufacturing sector. It is using industrial policy like many countries in East Asia and the West did by a moderate tariff reduction, protection, and subsidies such as PLI. A weaker rupee is a positive contributor to that strategy. So the strategy, which includes the exports in a more competitive, getting more competitive in the international market, and then also becoming India as a self-reliant country. So all this will be a positive contributor to that. So, but the sense of protracted export pessimism between 1947 and 1991 and of declining manufacturing in the 2.5 decades post 1991 entrenched India's position as a perennial net importer of goods and services with reasonably big trade deficits. So that is why a declining rupee hurts. So in during 1991, India had a perennial net importer of good. India was a prime importer. So that was the reason why this trade deficit had happened and then balance of payment crisis took place. So that is why a declining rupee hurts. So if this continues, then we could face the same situation also, right? So there are two points of view. One is the positive aspect, and the second is declining rupee, which is hurting. The nature of imports is a real challenge. This is a result of decades of resource pessimism. Despite being blessed with excellent geology, India's biggest import by far is oil, and almost 20% of the total. Demand for oil doesn't fall when prices rise. A fall in the rupee makes oil imports more expensive. So this affects trade deficit, but more importantly, it feeds into the economy in terms of higher inflation. So what this particular para says is that the nature of imports is a real challenge. This is a result of decades of resource pessimism, despite being blessed with excellent geology. So he's appreciating about the geographical condition what the India has, and India by far is the most biggest importer of oil, almost 20% of the total, and demand for oil doesn't fall because uh, a fall in rupee is what making the oil import more expensive. So this affects the trade deficit, and more importantly, it feeds into the economy in higher inflation. So even India's second biggest import, gold, has an inelastic demand. Indians are among the largest buyers of gold in the world, and it remains an important source of saving. A declining rupee can therefore upset the macroeconomic balance. India has a large forex reserve that RBI can use to defend the rupee. The exchange rate is fundamentally a price determined by demand and supply. So if RBI sells dollar with while others sell rupees, it can initiate depreciation, or it can mitigate depreciation. So there could be the strengthening of Indian rupee against the dollar, but at the cost of reserves. And at best, RBI can smoothen volatility, not the direction of the price. So it says basically what we do is whenever the currency of India is depreciating, so the first thing is that RBI can sell some of the foreign exchange, foreign money, or maybe the hard currencies from the forex, and then there could be a price stabilization which can happen in the demand and supply of dollars, and therefore it can mitigate depreciation. This action isn't without side effect. It squeezes liquidity, so there will be liquidity, and as a result, the inflation will go up. So, as a time of slowdown, when RBI is perhaps looking at a reducing interest rates, it would be dissuaded from doing so for fear of further outflow of dollars and the follow-on effect on the rupee. So, there could be an impact on growth as well. This action isn't without side effects. So the primary concern is the inflation which can take place. Then at the time of slowdown or during recession, RBI can look to reduce the interest rates, which can further slow down or which can further allow the outflow of dollars and follow-on effect of the rupee. So this will be a chain in which like it will be uncontrollable. And what can be done to ease the pressure on policymakers? The answer for the short run is to reduce import dependence, but not via protectionism. 50% of India's imports are on account of natural resources, oil, gold, diamonds, minerals, and metals. So there is a lot of scope to increase the domestic production of these. So the first uh, method which the author is selling is telling to not reduce to reduce the import dependence and not to export or not to import much of the natural resources. For example, oil, gold, diamonds, minerals, and metals. So there is a lot of scope to increase the domestic production of these. India's geology is like resource-rich nations like Canada, South Africa, and Australia. So government of India is reform-minded and open to increasing domestic production. But like unlike electronics, another big import sector where government of India has provided incentives like PLI, there are no incentives for resources. So this can be reconsidered. The other pathway is to reduce some dependence on oil, right? By switching more and more to renewable energy. India has done well on renewable energy generation capacity, which is substituting coal. But in oil-intensive sectors like vehicles, progress is slower. But at the same time, a depreciating rupee will supplement proactive policies on manufacturing and yield results that should help India become a net exporting nation in the medium term. So it tells that the way to combat the current scenario is either reduce the import for the products which we are getting from the foreign countries, and we can also try to limit the imports which are necessary goods as of now. But for example, oil, gold, diamonds, minerals, and metals, these are the much needed commodities which we need. But there is a lot of scope which we can reduce in terms of imports also. Now, when we are reducing all this. So there can be a scenario in which, in place of this, we can replace oil, for example, as renewable energy, right? So this can boost the sector, and the vehicles, oil intensive sectors, that progress will get intensified. And at the same time, a depreciating rupee will go up, and the proactive policies that India is making, it will help become India a exporting nation. So that was the concern. That is all for this. Thank you.